Hello, everyone. I am Belinda Cheeseborough, STEM Education Specialist at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm here to share the stories of African Americans and the impacts they've had and continue to have on American culture because of their STEM contributions. Through the Window and Into the Mirror is a career conversation series about the experiences of African American STEM professionals today. During this session, students will peer into the windows of their speakers' lives and learn from their lived experiences. They will also find parts of their culture and lifestyle mirrored in their stories. To everyone listening, it is our hope that you leave here with inspiration, information, and plans for action as you take your first steps toward having a career in STEM. Now we are here today at the National Museum of Natural History, here with Dr. Carla Easter in the wonderful Curious space here. And so, Carla.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, Belinda. It's lovely to have you here. I'm Carla Easter. I'm the Broh-Kahn Weil Director of Education here at the Natural History Museum. And it's just wonderful to have you here and to talk to you today.
Yes, it's wonderful to talk to you too. So first question, please tell us about your work, what you do, and anything else that you think is important for us to know.
Wow. So as I said, I'm the director of the Department of Education here. And so I work with an amazing group of educators who do amazing work here. We have a wonderful butterfly pavilion and insect zoo, which the department oversees. We also are in the exhibit. So we have exhibit activities every day, pretty much. In here in Curious, we have programming, school programs, after hours programs, family programs, everything that you can think of. And all of those activities fall under the watchful eye and guidance of the education department. And so I have the pleasure of working with all of the individuals that make those things happen.
That is so awesome. And this space is amazing. And we have to learn about your journey to getting to be in charge of this space along with other things as well. So starting off with your childhood, did you have an interest in STEM growing up?
Always. And so my father is an engineer and my mother was a nurse. And so I grew up in a house full of STEM, right? We didn't call it STEM back in, 19... Anyway, we didn't call it STEM then, but it was science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so my parents were always very supportive. And I will tell this story that I have always been... I really like mold.
Mold, really?
And so my mother, I know she would hate for me to tell the story, but anyway, if there was mold in the refrigerator, she would save it for me to look at before she threw it away.
Really? What was it about the mold that fascinated you?
It's just, the fact that you could put something in and, something that you ate and that, in a matter of a couple of days, right? Because back then there weren't that many preservatives in food. It would turn into something totally different.
Wow.
And the colors, and it was just really cool to see. Now, I don't want anybody to think that my mother was a bad housekeeper or that we had food for long periods of time, but it just was kind of, that was sort of my entry into, this is something I want to study because it's really cool.
So you could say that your mom was not only feeding you to sustain your life, but also feeding your interest.
Science, yes. Right. Feeding my science, yes.
So since you mentioned your parents, would you say that they were your biggest role models growing up?
Absolutely. From encouraging, my brother is a statistician, so he ended up in, the mathematical side of this, but from just supporting us to always being encouraging, right? Never letting us feel like we couldn't achieve something, right? My parents came up in the 60s. And so again, as African Americans, you didn't see many engineers or nurses back then. So not only were they role models for me in terms of the science, but just in terms of achievement, like all the things that no one could ever tell you no. If my dad could get through an aerospace engineering program in the early 60s as one of the only Black men at a university, there was a very
exciting time to be going through.
Absolutely. I have no excuses.
Yeah. No, that's very true. Things are very different now, but we can still see there's places where we need more Black people to be there.
Absolutely.
That's why our program is very important. So what are some other hobbies / interests you had while growing up aside from watching the mold?
Okay, by watching the mold. So I was a dancer.
Oh,
all
wow.
through school. So
Okay.
I took ballet and modern dance. And when I got to college, I danced all through college.
Oh.
I was a cheerleader, but also really excited about science. Always had a science fair project. Always involved in all of those things. So I think that it was really nice to have that balance, right? I always think that people in science also have an artistic side to them as
Yes.
well. And so, again, my parents fed and supported both sides of my brain growing up.
I love that. I love that so much. So speaking of school, where did you go for undergrad?
So I went to the University of California, Los Angeles, known as UCLA. Go Bruins!
Hey.
Yeah. And it was magical. I loved being a student at UCLA. Loved it.
And what did you study there?
So I started off as a biology major, and after my first foray into biology, I realized there were lots of pre-meds in biology.
Yes.
And it was cool and everything, but we did one section on microbiology. And after we did that section, I was like, I think I'm going to be a micro major. And there was a much smaller department, much more intimate. I got to have classes with far fewer people once I was in my upper division classes. And so, I ended up being a micro major and loved it. The micro department, at UCLA was just pretty cool people doing pretty cool stuff.
I love that. And also being in a smaller department, I also had a small department when I was in undergrad in physics, and it does help. It makes a difference.
Absolutely. You have study groups together, I mean, it's competitive, but again, everybody wants everybody to succeed. So I cherish those days.
What made you decide to go the biology route versus like other areas of science?
Yeah, I think for me, even as, I was privileged when I was in high school that we had genetics classes and micro classes and anatomy. And I think just looking back on how much I enjoyed genetics and microbiology, it just seemed like it was a good fit for me. And so it was really wonderful when I got to UCLA to have the opportunity to do something like that. And it also, it kind of fed into, I worked in a tissue typing lab.
Oh, wow.
When I was an undergrad. And so again, that kind of, that opportunity to be in a lab setting, to work with cells and, just to have all of the work that I was doing in class, being put into practice in a job was just really, really cool. So I think I've always been sort of drawn to things that you can't really see
with the naked eye, right?
Naked eye. Yeah, absolutely.
That's really cool. So you have your PhD.
Yes.
So that means we have to talk a little bit about grad school. So what made you decide to continue on to grad school?
I think there was a time when, as a micro major at UCLA, most people will go into a medical career. And I actually had the privilege to work with Dr. Sue McDermott, who was a transplant specialist, a pediatric transplant specialist. And so I did research with her on liver transplant patients.
Wow.
And, it was really difficult when you knew that the research that you were doing, typically on the on the samples from the patients, were sometimes patients who had passed away.
Wow.
Because, liver transplants are extremely difficult and there aren't a lot of livers out there, even now and then. And I realized, from that experience that medicine just wasn't really where I wanted to be. But I loved the ability to figure out and solve a problem, right? So I loved being on the other side of, let me figure out how I can make this better for the patient. Even if I don't have to see the patient, what can I do that will impact thousands, even millions of patients? And I think from working with her, a lot of conversations with her, that I just decided that research was a space that would be good for me, right? Because people always talk about, I'm sure you heard this too, that if you are a person that likes to solve problems, and if you're a person who loves to gather knowledge, you should get a PhD. Because that's what you spend all your time doing as a PhD.
Yes, most definitely. So speaking of your PhD, what did you study? So
I was in the Department of Biology at the University of California, San Diego. So I just went about 75 miles down the road actually 150 miles down the road from UCLA. And I ended up getting my degree in molecular genetics.
Oh.
And so I study bacteria, the molecular genetics of bacteria. So, yeah.
Oh, that's super interesting. So what were your best and most challenging parts while you were going through grad school?
I think probably the challenging part, like with any PhD student, is you just never know when you're done, right?
Yeah.
You just, it's not like being an undergraduate where you take these classes, you get these credits, and then you're finished. Being a graduate student, it really is about, when do I know I've gotten enough data to tell a complete story that I can then defend this thesis, because you become the world expert on this particular thing. And so I think it was always sort of that challenge. And, partway through my PhD, I ended up having to sort of switch my project a bit, sort of refocus it, because what we had been working, what we thought we had discovered turned out to not be what we thought it was. And so I kind of had to rethink, retool, and, sort of refocus. And, that's hard. Right? You spent all this time working on something, and then, I can very clearly remember sitting in my office in graduate school going, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Oh, that feeling is the worst.
It is the worst. And then you pick yourself up and you're like, okay, let me just switch this around and figure it out. So I think that was part of the challenge of it. And then I think the uncertainty of knowing where you're going to go next, right? After undergrad, you kind of know I could get a job. I could go to graduate school, right? That's the next step. When you're a graduate student, you ask those same questions, but it's like, where am I going to get a
because
job?
you need to figure it out.
You need to figure it out, right? I don't feel like there's many safety nets, So, yeah. So I think those were some of the most challenging times.
Yeah, that's understandable. And I can relate to that from my own graduate school experience, the feeling of just the uncertainty as well as like having to rethink things, but it's those skills that actually help you get through life too.
Resilience, right? Yeah. You become very resilient and very resourceful.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know exactly that, okay, I'm going to pick myself up and just sort of take what I know already, apply it to something else. Or in my case, I had to gain some other skills, right? I had to learn some other techniques, which served me well when I went on into my postdoc.
Okay. So moving on into your career, how did you
I get here?
Yeah, how did you get here? How did you get to be a part of the Smithsonian?
The funny story is I was working at the National Institutes of Health and worked with this museum on an exhibit called Genome Unlocking Life's Code. Oh. I was the project manager at the National Human Genome Research Institute, and I worked in partnership with my colleague Meg Rivers, who was in exhibits. And so we put that exhibit together in record time, like in 2 years from start to finish. We had this exhibit, and it was here for about 1.5 years, and then it traveled for the next 7 years. And so from that experience, I got to know a lot of people here in the museum. I got to go to other museums. I got to learn about, how do you put an exhibit together? How do you develop programming around a museum? And, I have always loved museums. And so 2-3 years, well, actually now almost 4 years ago, when they were looking for a director of education, I just said, I'll just put my name out there. I'll just try it out. And, they hired me. And so that's how I ended up here. I think, my prior knowledge, but also I think having my background in science really did help. Again, being resourceful, trying to know how to, solve problems. And the fact that this is, a research institute first and foremost, right? Research, amazing research goes on in this museum. And so I feel like I bring to this position an understanding of how to do research. And I can, the department, I kind of laugh all the time because I hear them say, she's a science person. She's going to want the data. Yes. Never come to her without the data. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So how is research done in museums? How is it different versus a national lab or a research?
Again, it's object-based, right? So a lot of the things we do are, related to the collections that we have, figuring things out based upon a great amount of data that's collected from these beautiful objects, right? And so, the thought process is it's the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's solving the problem, it's trying to figure things out. But I think the biggest difference here, you put your hand on it, you pointed to it. I can see these things,
Mm-hmm.
right? When I was doing research as a postdoc and a graduate student, these were not things you could see. And there's still people who do things that you can't see. We have a lot of people that are working on things that are amazing using electron microscopes and things like that. But again, I think it's really, for me, coming into a space that it's natural history based. So it's different. I came from a biomedical environment. And so it's just a different approach. And also the data that you're collecting is different and applied differently. But again, I think the very basics of it is still very much the same in terms of that scientific process, in terms of really trying to understand and solve a problem with just different tools.
Yes, beautifully said. So as a director of education and outreach and visitor experience, what are your responsibilities and what does your everyday look like?
Every day, lots of meetings. There's a lot of time in meetings. Some of them are fun, some of them are not so fun. I love when I get to meet with the students and the visitors, right? When I have an opportunity to talk to someone who's here, who's coming on a visit, or who just has a question and I get a chance to chat with them. Or, we have people who are coming from other museums and they want to hear about the things that we do. So those are the fun meetings. There's also, my responsibility is to make sure that the folks that are in the department are taken care of,
Mm-hmm.
that they're supported, and that I promote the work that they do. And so that to me is truly an honor and a privilege to be able to do that. But I think a lot of my time is spent, again, making sure that everything runs as smoothly as possible. So for instance, do we need to open the butterfly pavilion, or can we keep the butterfly pavilion open today because we found a leak? And what do we need to do about the leak? And so I go to my butterfly pavilion folks and say, so what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? Can we open it? Can we not open it? Making sure we also support the visitors. So making sure that, everybody who's in the visitor program has all their training and that they have the things that they need and that people are, again, being supported. So again, I think there's lots of nuances to it, but at the end of the day, it's really about building those relationships and supporting relationships you have with your colleagues and other people that are coming to the museum. I also feel it's very important to, be a cheerleader for the museum and to tell people this is an amazing space. You should be here.
Exactly.
What can I do to make this space more accessible to you, to make this space a space where you want to be? How can we be a resource? So that's the other part of it, right? There are the day-to-day things, but then there's also the idea of really spreading the word about the amazing things that are happening here. And, I always say, I'm always looking to develop, folks that are going to be the next generation of museum staff, leaders, innovators, right? So how can I bring people into this space to say, this is a career that I want? Because it is really pretty cool.
It is awesome. Your job is really cool. And the fact that you're focusing on the visitor experience is because that's what museums are for.
Absolutely.
They are for the people.
Absolutely.
And so it's really nice that you are making sure that people, their needs are met while they're in the space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can't do that without the folks that are in the department. I can't stress that enough, that I am just honored to be able to be part of a collective of people that make that happen every day, right? It's not me that does it. It's when you walk into the museum, it's the people you talk to at the information desk. It's the folks that are running the school programs, right? I'm just here, as I said before, to make sure they have the things that they need.
I love that. So earlier we were walking around in different exhibits, which was so fun. And so before we talk about the exhibits, I want to ask about Curious, because we briefly mentioned in the beginning. So what is Curious and why is this space important?
Yeah, so this is just an amazing space. So this is the Coralyn W. Whitney Education Center. And this space, and again, a lot of people will define it in different ways. For me, it is about people being able to get up close and personal with our objects. So we're in this beautiful space. You can see these objects. There are these drawers here that, people can open up and touch and feel this amazing collection. The museum has 148 million objects in its collection. It's mind-blowing.
That's an unfathomable number.
Right, exactly. And so what you see out in the museum is a very small percentage of our collections. Even here, we have about 6,000 to 7,000 objects represented here.
Just in Curious
Just
alone?
in Curious.
Wow.
And that's, again, a small percentage of what we have in our entire education collection. So this space is, as the same name says, is an education center. I think of it also as a learning center, right? It's about the experience of people being to learn about anything they're interested in related to natural history, but we meet them where they are. So we have family programs. If you are 3 years old, we teach you through play, the science of play. We love doing that. If you are a 7th grader, you may come to one of the school programs. If you're an adult, we let you come and play too, right? So you have the opportunity. So this space really was developed as a space where, when you go out into the museum, the exhibits are amazing, but sometimes they can be overwhelming.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so you can come into this space and have that quiet moment of reflection. And as I said before, play, right? You can just explore the way you want to explore the collections. And so to me, it is really an extension of the experience of being at the Natural History Museum, but one that can be incredibly personalized for someone. So yeah, it's a beautiful space. It's just wonderful to be in here.
It is it's in the name. It's curious.
It's curious. That's right. We encourage curiosity.
For all ages.
For all ages, exactly.
I love that. So moving into the exhibits, one of the exhibits we looked at was Our Places, and it's a temporary exhibit.
Yes.
And it closes in July?
I do believe July of this year, 2024.
Okay, so pretty soon.
Yeah.
So go check it out if you can.
Yep.
So what is Our Places about?
So Our Places is really about people's relationships with nature. And it's kind of an experiment for us because it is, we have changed out the individuals and their stories. So we had one group of individuals who told their stories, and now we've brought in a second set of stories. And it's about relationships with nature. And I think that is so important because the relationships we highlight are not just people who are out in the wilderness or in, rural areas. It's also about people who are in urban areas and how they've connected with nature. But I think what I often take away from it is how people use nature as something that is both healing, educational, but also it connects them, whether it's connecting them to prior connecting them to other communities or even their own communities or even past ancestors. Right. So it's just a very thoughtful space. It's a space where you can go touch. We encourage touch and feel. And just, again, it's a way to hear how people are connecting with nature and people that look like the rest of everybody else. Right.
Yes.
It is an incredibly diverse exhibit that really highlights how people from various communities are connecting with nature, sustaining nature, protecting nature. And again, every time I walk in there, it just makes me feel good to be in there.
It is a beautiful space. And I loved as you mentioned, the diversity of stories and presentations and representations of those stories.
Yeah.
So which part of the exhibit is your favorite?
Oh, I think, when you walk in, you will see these large boards that tell the stories of people. And I love just walking around, looking at the pictures and the stories and the quotes that people have. I mean, some people say the most profound things that just sort of sit right there.
Just sit right, yeah.
So I never get tired of going in there and just sort of reading about what these amazing folks are doing.
And so what are you hoping visitors that visit the space take away from it?
I hope what they take away from it is that we are all connected to nature in some way, right? And that you too can create these connections, right? That you don't have to be a scientist, all of us in many ways are scientists, right?
Yes.
We all love to explore. We all love to figure things out, but that people will take away from it that they too can find their connections. And those connections are very individual. There's no right way. There's no wrong way. It's just about how you choose to utilize the space that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think it's just, and also breaking down those barriers of what it looks like for someone to be in nature, right? That everybody can appreciate and be a leader in nature. And again, we try to be very representative of that. So yeah, I think it's just really a place for thoughtfulness.
Yes. Yes, I could definitely sense that from
Yeah.
going around earlier. And the next exhibit that we looked at was Cell Phone Unseen Connections.
Yes.
And this one is more of a long-term exhibit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's closing in about,
3 to 4 years,
Okay.
probably. Mm-hmm.
So you definitely have time to see it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what is Cell Phone Unseen Connections about?
So just as the name says, unseen connections, right? Most people don't realize how many of the elements, minerals are found in your cell phone. And it's kind of cool because when you see the exhibit, those minerals we have in the museum. So you can actually see what they look like in their native state, so to speak. So I think it's really about thinking about the cell phone in a very different way, right? Because it's more than just something that we use for communication or entertainment. It really has scientific value in terms of learning about science. So for instance, does anybody realize where these minerals come from? What does it take to mine them? Who's mining them?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, a lot of us have cell phones that we've, discarded and we're sitting in drawers, right? We should really think about reuse, refurbish,
Yes.
recycle, right? Because those minerals are valuable.
And there's not much of it.
And there's not much
Yeah.
of it, right? There's a limited amount. And people, are spending time and effort to mine these things.
Mm-hmm.
How the cell phone is not only a communication device from you to me, but can basically start a whole movement,
Mm-hmm.
right? How it can be used as a device to get the word out to multiple people, how it can be used for banking, right?
Mm-hmm.
The unseen connections of a cell phone. That there's so much to this little computer that we hold in our hands that we all lose our minds when we can't find it, right?
Yes.
That it is so much more, and there are so many unseen values to it, but also a lot of things for us to contemplate and debate, right? So again, do we ever think about what happens to our old cell phones?
Probably not. Most
Right?
likely
Do
not.
we ever think about, do we really need to have a new cell phone every year?
Or every 6 months.
Or every 6 months. Exactly. So again, just thinking about as humans, and again, going back to connections, we talked about our places in
Mhm.
nature, thinking about our role as humans, what is our responsibility to this planet? And, how are we impacting the planet by what we do with this device or don't do with this device? So again, it's giving you everything from the natural world to the kind of cultural connections to making us think about our responsibilities in terms of being good stewards.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how was the creation of Cell Phone, because it's a newer exhibit,
Mhm.
so how is it the creation of this exhibit different from like the older exhibits that you have here
Yeah,
in the museum?
again, I think this really was the brainchild of one of our curators, Josh Bell, and he took, 10 years to sort of, put this all together and to finally get it done. And I think the difference being that, again, the connections, right?
Mhm.
Really thinking about the anthropology of this. It really, he really had this, and again, I'm not in Josh's head, so I'm
Yes.
just sort of giving my own thought about this, but really thinking about the social impacts of cell phones, right? That people will ask, well, why would you do a cell phone exhibit in a natural history museum, right? It
Yes.
feels like it should be like in a history museum or a science center. But when you think about it, the science, the elements that we have and the minerals that we're using in those cell phones, as I said, are represented in our collections. But it's also that this is a museum about the natural world, and anthropology is part of the science of the natural world. And so how cell phones connect us as humans. And so I think, again, it is a wonderful example of how when you think about museums and their evolution and how they're meeting people where they are and what people expect to see here, I think it's just a wonderful representation of how we can think about museums being, not only sort of cultural spaces, but also spaces for debate and discussion. And when you and I were talking about, we were up there, we
Yes.
were looking at this cell phone. I mean, it's amazing to think about, what we did before we have cell phones, and now what a cell phone does for us. And again, I think that is the beauty of, and the goal of a museum, is for people to discuss, and as I said, debate, to have these conversations. And I think that exhibit does that just beautifully.
It really does. And actually, that leads into my next question about which is your favorite part.
So my favorite is definitely the wall where we show what you had before cell phones and what you had to do, and now you have a cell phone. So, you have like a fax machine there. Like, who sends a fax? Have you ever gotten a fax? Thinking about calculators, the example of payphones.
Oh, yeah,
like
the
a payphone.
yeah.
When's the last time you saw a payphone? A VCR, even CDs. Like, I think to myself, my nieces who are 11 and 6 have probably never seen or heard a CD.
That's crazy.
Everything they do is streamed, right?
Yeah, it's true.
It's completely different. So I just kind of chuckle when I see that, because I'm just like, oh my God, even I have fallen victim to this, because my phone does so much.
We don't need anything else. We just need our phone.
Just need your phones. And we talked about this, for instance, maps.
Yes,
right?
maps,
People don't know how to read a map anymore, because they just put in, where they want to go, and the phone tells you where to go. So you really, we've lost that kind of art of map reading, which makes me sad in some ways.
Well, it will come back.
It will come back.
Yeah.
You're right. What's old is new, and what's, it all comes back around.
So leading into my final question about this exhibit, what are you hoping visitors take away from it?
Again, just being a responsible steward, right? Thinking about your cell phone as more than just a device, but it is connected to nature, right? And it has amazing impacts. But again, can we think more about the idea of reusing, recycling, refurbishing, right? Is it, as we talked about, is it really necessary to have a phone every year, every 6 months, right? Yeah. Because again, someone has to mine those minerals and those substances and build those things. And again, it is, as you pointed out, there is a limited amount of those resources. So I just want people to be thoughtful, just kind of think more about, as they're using their phones, really thinking about how this phone is connecting them to nature.
And how it impacts their environment and community.
Absolutely.
So moving on to the final exhibit that we looked at earlier, which is one of the oldest exhibits, the Birds of DC.
Absolutely, yeah. So this building was built in 1910, the original building. That exhibit is from 1923.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so it's 101 years old.
So crazy.
And the birds are really good for being.
Yeah, they really do,
don't they?
I need their skincare routine. You know.
Absolutely.
Or their feather care routine. Yeah. So, do you have a favorite bird?
I do. So I love the cardinals.
Oh.
And the cardinals, it really goes back when my mom, when her older brother passed away, my Uncle Neil, there used to be a cardinal that would peck on the window at her house. And she used to always say, "That's Uncle Neil. That's Neil. Hey, Neil." And my mom passed away last year. And so now when I see a male and a female cardinal together, I like to think that that's my mom and her brother kind of hanging out together again. So I have a bird feeder. I put up 2 bird feeders during COVID so that I could see and watch the birds out of my window when I was working from home. And I love to watch the cardinals. I love seeing them. They're birds. They stay here all winter, so you can see them throughout the winter. So yeah, the cardinals hold a very special place for me.
And I can imagine the male cardinals, how vivid the red is against like a snowy background.
Oh my gosh, they're just beautiful. Yeah, yeah.
So speaking of birds, Blackbirders Week is coming up, our favorite time of year.
We love Blackbirders Week.
So can you tell me a little bit about what it's about and how you got involved?
Yeah, so how I got involved is when I first came to the museum, I reached out to the young naturalists who really were responsible for putting together Blackbirders Week, and just asked them, what can we do? What, and we looked to them to give us some guidance on how we as a museum and the African American History and Culture Museum could work together to celebrate Black Birders Week. And so for me personally, Black Birders Week is really about celebrating the fact that although, people may think that, Black folks have only gotten into birding now, we've been in birding for centuries, right?
Yeah,
we've
exactly.
been doing it a long time.
How do you think all those scientists even learned about some of these birds? Yeah,
exactly. And so to me, it is an opportunity to just highlight the fact that there is a diversity of people that are looking at birds and studying birds and love birds. It also is just joyous for me to go on a bird walk with people and just sort of share stories about birds. And just, I have an aunt, my Aunt Alice was watching birds from whenever I can remember. My first book is called Feathered Friends. She bought it for me when I was like 3 years old. So, there is just such a long history of this in probably a lot of people's families. So for me, it is about family. It is about heritage. It is about science. It is just, again, that connection to nature. But, being able to celebrate amazing creatures that are just so beautiful and, bring so many people so much joy. So
it's very true. Yeah,
I'm looking so forward to it.
I am looking forward to it too. And that's what I was getting a sense of as we were looking at the birds of DC, seeing all these different species of birds, many.
That you would never think are right here in your backyard. It is amazing if you just spend 15, 20 minutes, if you have a bird feeder, just sitting and watching how many birds come to get food. It's pretty cool.
Exactly. So now moving on to your life outside of your career, because you are a full, well-rounded person. You told us that your parents were your role models while growing up. So, but do you have any role models now, or are you just saying you're a role model now?
No, not at all. No, I think, I a person that I spend a lot of time reading about is, and it's going to sound really strange when I say this, but Eleanor Roosevelt
really
is someone who was a reluctant leader, but was an amazing person who did some amazing things. And I just really admire what she was able to do in a difficult time, right? She always did what she thought was right. That's what guided her, what she thought was right. And I think that's how I feel that I often think that the people I admire are the folks that are guided by what is right. And that's so important to me. I mean, and there are lots of people who I could say, I admire, Barack Obama was someone who I just feel was, I came into the federal government right before he became president. And so as a federal employee, it was amazing to have him as our chief and leader, and his family, Michelle Obama, just amazing people. But I feel like, there are so many people closer to me, my mom, my dad, Sue McDermott, those are the people. I had an amazing professor, Professor Brown, when I was a graduate student. Dr. Brown was the only African-American member of the department at the time. And I told him I came to this graduate department because
to work with him. Wow.
And he's in his 90s now, but Dr. Willie Brown, and he just is someone who I just absolutely admire. So I have those folks that are kind of up here that, you pattern, you read about, but then there are the people every day that, they give you hope and strength because of their resilience and the things that they have been able to do. So
that really speaks volumes, right? Because it doesn't have to be a celebrity, or it doesn't have to be like a world leader. Sometimes your role models are just right around
next
you.
Door. That's
right. I
love
that.
Next door.
So I can imagine that you probably still don't look at mold as much as you did when you were except for this probably needs to get tossed out.
Slime mold outside, but that's about it.
So now as an adult, do you still partake in the same hobbies that you did as a kid, or you have new hobbies now?
No, I actually have a new hobby. So new and old, so to speak. So when I was in 5th grade, I watched this amazing show called Zoom. You probably too young to remember Zoom.
No, I
know Zoom. Okay. So one of the shows on Zoom, and I remember this, I think I was probably like in 5th grade, Zoom did a show on bees.
Oh.
And they showed inside a beehive, one of the worker bees was doing what's called a waggle dance. And basically she was showing the other bees where to go get the pollen and the nectar. And so from that day on, I was like, I am going to keep bees. I'm going to be a beekeeper one day. So it took me almost 50 years, but I now have 2 beehives, which I started my beehive, my colonies. I'm not really sure what you say, because the bees do everything themselves. You are just the steward, and you're just trying to keep them healthy and letting them do what they do. But I have two hives, and I think I've gotten them through the winter, which is the mark of your first year. You're just trying to keep them alive. Aww. And so I don't have any honey yet, but hopefully this year I will be getting honey from my beehives.
Fingers crossed for honey.
Yes. But,
so what are the I guess life lessons you've learned from beekeeping?
Oh my gosh, so much. So, bees they're a super organism. They work as one. Most people think it's all about the queen, but really it is about the colony that decides the direction. If they don't like that, if the queen is not doing what she needs to do, they will create another queen.
Oh,
They'll
wow.
raise another one. Yeah, it's pretty intense. But I think what I've learned from beekeeping is just the beauty of that they all work together as there is a collective there. They're all trying to sustain the hive. Everybody has a job. They know what they need to do. And it is amazing to just open it up and see these creatures, how they figure stuff out. Like, one thing is in the winter when the days are, when it's nice and they can go out and fly, and just because they won't use the bathroom in the hive, they'll go out and do that. But when they go out, and you can see them sort of dragging the bees that have died out of the hive. So they have these mortuary bees that keep the hive clean.
Oh, wow.
It's just amazing. You think about that they've evolved to be so efficient and just amazing. So every time I go into a beehive, I'm struck by the amazingness of it, and it just makes me happy.
It's their own little world.
It's their own little world. Yeah.
That's so cool. I didn't know that bees carried the dead out.
They
Is it kind of like a processional?
Well, I don't know if they have a funeral for
them. Yeah, they have a funeral for the bees.
But no, they keep the hive very clean.
Wow.
They will take them out. Yeah, it is. It's pretty amazing the way they have divided they're a society, right? They're a society. You have the ones that will tend to the queen, feed the queen.
Wow.
They feed the babies. They clean out the comb, and it's just amazing. I could talk about bees for hours about that. So we'll cut it short there, because
I'm very interested in the bee conversation. We can have that after.
Yes, absolutely.
But we do have to come to a close. I know. So I have final 2 questions for you. The first of which, what does Black/African American representation in STEM mean to you?
It means everything to me. It is so important to me, especially when we have school groups here or different groups, that if I have an opportunity that I get to introduce myself and to talk to them, to show them and let them know, you can do this. There are people that look like you that do these things, because there was someone who looked like me who came to me and said, you can do this. And I think that is so important. We need to represent that there are many of us doing amazing things. And there are many that came before us who did amazing things who nobody remembers. So we have to keep that memory going, right? I wasn't the first, right? There's somebody out there who did amazing things in natural history who paved the way for me to be able to be here.
And you won't be the last either.
And I won't be the last. In fact, I'm hoping every time I see a student, I'm thinking, which one of you is going to take this job, right? Which one will you be here sitting in the seat with the next, Belinda, having this conversation?
And not just taking your job, but also building upon what you've done too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And my final question
Yeah.
for you is, what advice do you have for the members of our audience, particularly the middle schoolers and the high schoolers who are probably going to be watching this interview that want to follow a similar path as you?
Oh yeah, just follow your dreams, right? You know, I said 5th grade, I watched a beekeeping, show, and I'm beekeeping. So never forget those dreams that you have now. You may not see them come to, they may not come true, when you're 15 or 20. It may take you until you're 50, but that's okay. Hold on to that.
Mm-hmm.
And remember that feeling, right? That first feeling you had when you saw the first bee, or you saw the first plane ride, or your first visit to a museum, the awe that you felt. Keep that with you so that you can say, one day I'm going to work here. And that's what you work toward, right? You find the people. So just, and again, don't be discouraged, right? Everything doesn't happen the way we want it to happen, but that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
right? As long as you kind of have a thought of what you want to do and kind of hold on to the things that you enjoy, right? That's always important. And I also think always keep something that you have a passion for.
Yes.
Right? If your passion is dancing, if your passion is writing, if your passion is beekeeping, always make space for those passions, right?
You have to feed the whole self.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to be whole people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that makes us whole. But yeah, just keep following your dreams. And just because, it's
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Carla.
My
Thank you for
pleasure.
showing us around earlier and for telling us so much about your job and also your story. Your story is beautiful. And I hope that our members of our audience are able to take inspiration from your story
I hope so.
as well. And to all of you watching, thank you for watching. And please remember, history is made by doing ordinary tasks extraordinarily well over long periods of time. Thank you for watching Through the Window into the Mirror. And that's all, folks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That was so much fun.